with election season underway in the United States and a minority government here in Canada, infrastructure is once again a top political issue. Both U.S. President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau have made some significant commitments in regards to infrastructure spending. But with those commitments are questions about feasibility. Now, while there is a need to improve aging roads, bridges, and importantly, our power grid, there is still a lot to be debated on how either country achieves their goals and how those projects are paid for. Well, joining us now to discuss the issue of infrastructure spending is Brendan Caldwell, Director at Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back.
Thank you, Nima.
So it seems aging infrastructure continues to be a big concern in Canada, especially as we work towards this electric future. So what are your thoughts on this issue, Brendan?
Well, I do think it's a big deal. We're seeing it here in Toronto, where the entire city seems to be under construction. It's though they've stored up decades worth of infrastructure work, both repairs and expansion, to do it all in one summer, such that it's completely gridlocked. But I must confess, I would rather live in a city where they're actually are fixing, building, and expanding than one where it's all just falling apart. But the issue of whether infrastructure is falling apart stretches right across this country to California to Maui, particularly in Maui, where they've had these massive fires have been largely blamed on the infrastructure, particularly the electrical grid starting it. So as much as people want to say it's global warming, I think it's more an aging infrastructure. We had the same problem in California with PG&E back in 2018.
Now, we know a lot of people are not really big fans about potentially increasing taxes, but we know how big of a role tax funds can play in updating our infrastructure. So where do you stand on this, Brendan? Do you think we need to raise taxes to address this infrastructure problem?
Well, I'm loath to say raise taxes for this, because whenever taxes are raised, whether they be in general on the coffers of income or profits, or whether they are specific like carbon taxes, they tend to just go into the general coffers, and whether they get used on longer term projects, well, seems to be less and less the case nowadays. I do think, though, that investing in companies like, say, I don't know, Qantas Services, a symbol PWR in the US, makes a lot of sense, because their business is hardening the power grid, making it less susceptible to these kind of catastrophes. Indeed, we've started an entire fund in partnership with Lazard just to focus on infrastructure build out, which will, in one form or another, going to be a priority for governments, not just in North America, but around the world.
All right. And on that note, we know that by 2035, the goal here is to have all cars, SUVs, and light trucks sold in Canada to be electric. But I guess the bigger question would be, are we ready? Have we modernized our infrastructure to include all the charging stations necessary for this future?
Well, I'd like to say I know John F. Kennedy and that our prime minister is no John F. Kennedy, but maybe, just maybe, pointing to the stars and saying, we will have this done by this date, will give somebody something to work toward. Societies do tend to do well when they're working toward a common goal. And if indeed enough people believe that this is a worthwhile goal, we can do it. From not having a space program to putting somebody on the moon took barely over a decade in the United States. So I think it can be done if there's the will to accomplish it. I think to some extent it will be done, so that I do think that these infrastructure type investments, like, as I say, Quanta, or just strategies that look at infrastructure as a whole, will be continually, year after year, doing well for, I think, the next decade.
Some good news there, Brendan. Just about a minute left here, but another thing to consider is the sheer weight of electric vehicles, which are considered to be about 30% more heavier than gas-powered vehicles. So how will that play into our electric future and infrastructure?
Well, I'm about 30% heavier than I ought to be there, Nima, so I resemble that remark. Yeah, I think that's going to take a further toll. If you look around Toronto, you can see all of our roads are chewed up. Part of that's the frost, but part of it's simply the weight of the vehicles. I do wonder if roads are paved, especially with a view to having to repave them in 5 or 10 years' time, because if they never had to be repaved, there wouldn't be any job for pavers. But yes, I do think heavier cars will create a greater need for better, stronger infrastructure as well. And you do want to be in the bigger vehicle when you're driving down the highway. So maybe when they're all self-driving, accidents will be a thing of the past. But I think that may, like electric vehicles in general, as the widespread norm, be a few years out.
Lots to consider, lots to look forward to. Brendan Caldwell, thank you again for your time today.
Thank you, Nima.
We'll be right back.